All right, we'll test. Oh, you can hear me now, can't you? Okay. Is that too loud? Not for you. That's all that's important, Lewis. Important. Good to you. All right. So, thank you all for coming. We're going to get started with confirmation here tonight and get going. In our first lesson, Lewis was here last week and kind of went through the orientation to confirmation stuff. So I hope he was nice to you all. Thanks for being here. And so we'll do like we normally do. We'll have confirmation up here for about an hour, and then we'll go into our small groups downstairs like you did last week. Did you all go downstairs? You stayed up here the whole time? Okay. Well, we'll see. Oh, someone outside? Okay. All right. Well, we are going to get started. So for tonight, everybody's going to need a notebook. Everybody should have a notebook, and everybody should have a Bible. So you're going to need those out, and of course a writing utensil at some point to take notes, whether we're writing in the Bible or we're writing in our notebooks. So we're going to get started. Come on. Hold up. I got to check my clicker's not working for some reason, but that gives you guys time to get your stuff. She called. Yep. Why did this suddenly stop working? No. Why? Oh, there. All right, technology is wonderful. All right, so we're going to start with our opening prayer. So if everybody could join me, bow your heads. Adopt a prayerful position, whatever that is for you. All right. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this time to gather as your children to talk about you, talk about your love for your people throughout the history, see where it all started in the Bible, and what that means for today. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right. So, upcoming stuff. We have things that are going to be happening over the next few weeks or so. So that's really hard to read. I need to make it bigger. But this Sunday is the fall kickoff, which after the 10 o'clock service at 11, down behind the church, we're going to have the fall kickoff like we've had in years past. There will be food, there will be character artists, there will be face painters, there will be musicians, there will be the bouncy house, all that fun stuff. So we invite people to come down, hang out, be part of it. If your family wants to come and they want to bring their own blanket and chairs, they can do that, kind of have their own little area in the back grass. That's great. If you want to bring some extras beyond just the stuff we're going to be providing, which will be like chips and hamburgers and hot dogs, and little cups of different things, drinks, desserts, feel free, you can do that. But we'd encourage everybody to come out to the fall kickoff, have fun, get to see people you might not have seen in a while, and just kind of re-energize the church year as we start moving forward. So that is this Sunday. And then we do still have youth group. We won't have it this Sunday because of the fall kickoff, but we have been meeting on Sundays following the 10 o'clock service on the 20th, which will be the next time we're going to meet. We have a special couple service projects and a nice big art project that we're going to be doing. So we encourage as many people to come join us for that experience. And then there is any of you 8th graders who may be thinking of going to lab, or even if you're like not sure you want to go to lab next year, there is going to be, I sent an email out inviting you all to join us for a lab gathering. We're going to have pizza and just talk about life and get caught up. So that's for all of the young people, 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. So that is coming up also. All right. So we're going to start talking, the first half of this year, we're going to be talking about the 10 Commandments. And in order to start that conversation, we are going to begin with a conversation of the Old Testament. All right. So in the Bible, the Bible itself, this big book that you all have, everybody raise their Bible up. It is divided into 2 sections, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Which comes first? The Old Testament comes first. So, starting at the beginning of it, we're going to talk about the Old Testament. The Old Testament is kind of, if you want to think about it, the history of God's people before Jesus. The beginning of the New Testament begins with the 4 Gospels, which anybody know what the 4 Gospels are? Name one of them. Go ahead. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz, for that correct answer. So those are the first 4 books of the New Testament. But we're going to start in the Old Testament and talk about what leads up to the 10 Commandments. And we're going to start at not the very beginning of the Old Testament, but pretty darn close, talking about this guy named Abraham, who at that point, when we start the story, his name is Abram. So if everybody could follow along with me, we're going to go to Genesis, which is the first book of the Old Testament, and chapter 12. Chapter 12. So each of the chapters are different pages. You'll start, it goes chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Those are the main numbers you'll see in blue. And then each of the verses, each sentences, generally sentences, within each chapter are numbered also, and those are the verse. So if I say go to Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, you would go to look at that and find chapter 12, which is on page what? Anybody? 36. So we should all be on page 36. So chapter 12, verse 1 reads, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." That's how the story of Abram starts. So a little bit of history about Abram. Before the story of Abram, we get all the stories that you might have heard of. You've got the beginning of all creation, the stories of Adam and Eve. You have the stories of their son, Cain and Abel. You have Noah's Ark. You have this story, and right before we get to Abram, you have the story of the Tower of Babel, who these people, and they decided they wanted to build a tower higher than God. And so they built this gigantic tower, but God said, no, you're not going to build a tower bigger than I am, and knocks the tower down, and the people are divided, and they kind of separate out. So then we get to the story of Abram, and Abram covers a lot of Genesis, the story of this guy named Abram. His parents, his people, are believers. They follow this God, this deity God, this one true God. Now, a lot of the other people throughout the region all had different gods. Some people even had their own gods for their own house. Like, literally, they would have, like, this family, which would probably be about 20 or 30 people living together, moms and dads and kids and grandparents and uncles and all these people living together. They would have their own god that they would worship in their home. So the fact that these folks had one God that was supposed to be the only God was kind of this strange, weird way of looking at it. Because other people would have maybe their God in their house, and then the God of the area, and then maybe they worshiped during the spring, they'd worship this God to make the crops grow, and at different times they'd have a different God, and they would worship multiple gods. But for Abram and his family, there was just one God. So Abram is sitting there, and we're going to look at a map here, in the Middle East. And his family, you can barely see it, but way down on the far right there is the city called Ur. Everybody say Ur. Ur. U-R. That's a strange named city. His family was once there, and his dad, at one point, decides to move them, and they move all the way from there, all the way up to that top of that peak. So this place called Haram, and they get there, and they're really supposed to go further, but his dad's like, this is a nice place. We've got good land. We've got good crops. We've got plenty of water. Let's just stay here. But that wasn't God's plan. So God comes to Abram and says, I want you to go to this land that I'm going to give you. And when you go there, your people, all your descendants, for ages and ages will be living there, and I will make you prosperous, and I will give you so much. And so Abram looks around, and he grabs his wife Sarai, and he grabs his nephew, whose name is Lot, and he grabs their whatever goats and camels and livestock they may have. He didn't have any children of his own, and they go. Now, how many of you have moved in your life? I've moved a bunch. Is it easy to move? Is it easy to leave a place that you've lived for a long time, say goodbye to all your friends, pack everything up, and go to a new place? Not necessarily always. Sometimes it's tough. It's a new place. You don't know anything. You don't really know. God never really said, I'm taking you to this wonderful place. I've got a house set aside for you, anything. He's just like, I just want you to go. And Abram goes, okay, God, I'll trust you. I believe you. And he grabs his wife, and he grabs his nephew and his nephew's family, and he heads down. So they start up in Haram, and they begin moving their way south towards this land that God has promised him. So in chapter 12, verse 4, we see it says, So Abram went as the Lord has told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all the possessions they had gathered, and the persons whom they had acquired in Haram, and they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, To your offsprings I will give this land. So Abram, what's he do next? Can we read what the next verse says? Right? What does it say, Roland? He built an altar to the Lord. Now, for those who've been here in confirmation for a couple of years, at different times when we talked about table stories, right? We talked about places where we meet God. And we talked about altars and how a lot of times the Israelites and different people, followers of God, they would take rocks when they would get to a place, and something memorable would happen there, and they would stack them up. And usually they would pour oil on them to anoint them and bless them and say, this is an important place. God has done something amazing here. And they would build altars. And so Abram does that. When he gets to this place, he's like, great, God just gave me this great land. It's beautiful. Now, the fact that there's a bunch of people called the Canaanites who live there, who probably weren't really happy that Abram suddenly comes and says, guess what? My God gave me this land. It's going to be for me and all my descendants forever. Do you think the Canaanites were happy? No, not happy at all. But Abraham gets settled in, and he lives there for a while. But unfortunately, a drought comes. So what's a drought? What's a famine? Brandon? Lack of food, and yes, and usually a drought will cause a famine. A drought is a lack of water, lack of rain from the sky, and eventually that happens, the crops dry up and there's no food. So this happens, and Abram's like, well, we just got to this wonderful place. And reminder, how old is Abram when this is happening? 75 years old, right? He is not a spring chicken. He's not a 16-year-old kid going like, hey, this is cool, this is a fun road trip. No, he's 75 years old, and he's just gone hundreds of miles to this foreign place and set up a land. And his wife, she's 65. She's like 10 years younger than him. She's not a young person either. But they go and they do this. And when they get there and they get all set up, a famine comes. And there's no food. So what do? Well, they looked around and they kept hearing tales that over in Egypt, there was lots and lots of food. Lots to drink. It was great. Everything was wonderful there. They didn't have a famine. You should go to Egypt. So they pack up everything with them. They pack up Lot, they pack up Sarai, they pack up all their goats and their cows and their sheep and their whatever they've got, and they go from, it's kind of hard to see, where Canaan is when you see the line going down, and then you see that little hump, when they're going down on the side of the Mediterranean, and you get to that little hump there, that's Canaan. So they went past there all the way across into, where he's highlighting, into Egypt. This is where we have one of the first unique stories. But I need help for this. So I need 3 volunteers. You're going to be my volunteers for this evening. Come on. 3, I need 3 volunteers. Come on. You don't have to say anything, you just have to be here. Come on, Garrett. All right, Brandon. Come on, I need a female, so I don't have to make one of the guys be a woman. All right. Garrett, you get to be Abram. All right? And see how this is going to work. You get to be Sarai, Abram's wife, and Brandon, because you're such a stylish fellow, you get to be the king. There you go. That's good enough. Oh, and of course, the king has to have a crown. All right, so Brandon, if you could stand over here. So Abram and Sarai come to Egypt. Now, we're down in around verse 10. And actually, verse 11. He goes, when Abram was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know well that you are a woman beautiful in appearance. That's a pretty nice thing for a guy to say about his wife, right? And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, because they will try to take his wife from him. Say that you are my sister, so that all will go well with me because of you, and my life will be spared on your account. So Abram literally tells his wife, we're going to pretend to be brothers and sisters. Okay? Does that sound like somebody who's fully trusting in God? We'll see. So, they go up, they get and meet the king. Now, the king of Egypt looks over and he sees Sarai and he's like, wow, she is beautiful. She is amazing. And so he goes, I want to take her as my wife. And Abram's like, well, sure, she's my sister. So Sarai goes and becomes one of the wives of the king of Egypt. But shortly after that, all of a sudden, a disease breaks out. Let's see where that is. Okay. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called to Abram. So Abram came and talked to the Pharaoh. And he says, what have you done to me? You've lied to me. This is not your sister. and he goes, all right, I just want you to leave. And so he looks at him and he says, she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife. Now then, here is your wife. Take her and be gone. And Pharaoh gave his men orders concerning him, and he set him on his way. And he sent him with a bunch of livestock and goods, everything he would need. He's like, go, just here, take all this stuff I'm going to give you, just go away. And so Abram and Sarai left Egypt to head back to Canaan. Now, with a bunch of extra stuff. Now they have more goats, more sheep. All these, now they probably have some followers, some slaves that they're taking to take care of their things as they move back to Canaan. And when they get there, they're like, we've got a lot of stuff, right? Oh, I need one more volunteer. One more volunteer. You can have a seat, Brandon. I'll need you again, though, in a little bit, so you can keep your crown on. Come on up. Oh, this is going to be fun. All right, here you go. Put that on. All right. So Brendan is going to be Lot, who is Abram's young nephew. He's been going with him, traveling with him. He's acquired stuff. They get back to Canaan, and Abram looks at him and goes, we have so much stuff. We can't farm together. We can't have my sheep with your sheep, my cows with your cows, my goats with your goats. They're going to get confused. So Abram looks at Lot and says, you pick. If you go left, I will go right. If you go right, I will go left. And so Lot, is Lot, are you a smart guy? Okay. When you look at the land, if you look to one side, and there is like plenty of water, green fields, lots of beautiful land, and all that. And then the other is like, it's okay. It's got a little rocky on that side, more hills. You don't want to, which way are you going to go? Lot, which way are you going to go? You're going to go to the nice valley with lots of green grass and lots of water to feed your animals? Or are you going to go up on the rocks where it's kind of rocky and nasty and it's going to be hard to raise your family and your crops? You're going to go to this side, right? And so Abram's like, good choice, Lot. And so Lot goes over here by the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah. These two towns, they're there. He sets up shop in between there. And Abram and Sarai take theirs and they go over here. Now, they're getting older, right? It's been a few years. They're still getting old. And Sarai still doesn't have any kids. She still hasn't had any babies. She's getting a little worried. It's like, who's going to carry on Abram's stuff? Who's going to get all his inheritance? Because he's getting kind of old. But they're happy. They've set up this place. And they're in this land. And God has blessed them. And then some not so good things happen. Lot is out there in his house, and a couple of kings from nearby places decide, we want to take over that land. And so they come in and invade, and they grab Lot, and they take him and they capture him. Now that's not good. What do you think Abraham felt when his nephew, who's been following him very, very faithfully for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles, suddenly gets captured? What do you think? He's scared? They might take his land. Yeah, I'm sure he was scared. Do you think he wanted to go rescue his nephew? Sounds good. Do you want Abram to come rescue you? Okay. So he does. He grabs some of his men. He's got hundreds of people now with him. I mean, this isn't like when he left Egypt, he got lots of people, and his crops his goats kept multiplying, and he kept getting more and more people, and he had to have more and more slaves, and he had to have more and more people work for him, and he had all these people, and so he goes and picks a few hundred of them and says, we're going to go get my nephew. And so Abram leads his little army over, and they defeat these kings who have taken Lot and the surrounding area. There were 5 kings against 4 kings, and it was a massive battle, but Abram's people win. They get Lot back, and he's free. Then we have this really weird thing happen. So I want you to write this down under Abraham. So everybody at the top of your book, write Abraham. Abraham rescues Lot. Okay? Abraham rescues Lot. And after the battle, this king, King Melchizedek, and I've got it written up on the it's a hard name, Melchizedek, right? That's a very, very strange name. He comes to the battlefield afterwards and hears of what has happened. And he blesses Abram. Now, Melchizedek is a very strange name, but you can literally break it down. The first part, Melchi, literally means, or is it Melchi? Means king. So that first part, Melchi, literally means king. The last part, Zedek, means righteousness. So he is literally, by his name, the king of righteousness. And he comes and he gives Abram bread and wine and blesses him. Now, do we know of any other kings that we've studied in confirmation who brought bread and wine and blessed people? You can't? Anybody? Jesus? Does it sound reminiscent of Jesus? Now, you're like, Jesus wasn't alive then. You're right. But here is this fellow, this king who comes and blesses him. After what he's done, he's been faithful to God, and he uses bread and wine, and he has this moment with Abram, and he blesses him. It says, then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of the God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered our enemies into your hands. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. That means everything that he had acquired. And usually after a battle, you required more stuff, right? You take what the people you take over had. But he gives a tenth of what he took to this king. One of the things that we are asked to do as God's people is to tithe, which is to give a tenth of everything that we get to God. This is where that kind of originates. This priest, this kingly priest of the God Most High, and that is where we kind of leave this story. So, Abram has gotten back his friend Lot, his nephew Lot. They are back here. He's been rescued. He's been blessed. And then we get to this part where God and Abram have a covenant. Do you guys remember? Did you guys talk about covenants last week? Probably not, because I wasn't here. You did. What is a covenant? Does anybody remember from previous conversations and confirmation what a covenant is? Lydia. It's a religious agreement. Okay, that's one way to look at it. Anybody else? Grace? Okay. Yes. I like that. It's an agreement between two people that says we're going to do this to live together. And so God makes a covenant with Abram and says, I am going to be your God. You are going to be my people. And he looks down and he says, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? Oh, that's not where I wanted to go. Oh, one of the things we forgot to talk about is way back in chapter 12, which we're only a couple chapters away from there. God made a promise to Abraham. He made this promise that I am going to make you a great nation. Your descendants are going to be so great, they'll be more than the stars in the sky, right? You're going to have so much land, you're going to be prosperous, but you're going to bless the entire world through your descendants. Now, Sarai, do you have any kids at this time? No. If you don't have any kids, is it hard to have grandkids? Is it hard to have great-grandkids? Yeah. So, Abram and Sarai don't have any kids. But God has promised, I'm going to make you a great nation. You're going to have so many descendants, they're going to be greater than the number in the sky. Now, how many of you know people who have babies when they're like 80 or 90 years old? No. You're right. Usually we don't have babies that often when we're 80 or 90 years old. So Sarai and Abram are looking at this like, we're getting a little old to be having kids, right? So they do a couple things. Now this is a little weird. This is very weird when you read this story. So Sarai goes to her handmaid, one of her slaves, named Hagar, and says, I want you to sleep with my husband so that we can have a baby. Because we need to have a baby to have descendants, to carry out this covenant with God, to have all the things that God's promised us. We got to have babies. And so I'm going to take you, literally takes her slave to Abraham and says, you should have a child together. That seems a little weird, right? But back then, a lot of times people did have multiple wives and things like that. But it does seem really weird to us. But they go ahead. Very weird. But they do. And they have a baby. And his name is Ishmael. Now, have any of you studied religions in school? Right? Does anybody know the name Ishmael? Yes, I hear. So you wait down in your head. Do you remember where you hear it from? Nope. Okay. We're going to get to that side of the story here in just a second. So, Sarai is very happy. Abram is very happy. They now have a baby. They can have lots and lots of kids. They're going to have a baby. They're going to have a kid, which means they can have grandkids, which they can have lots of grandkids, which means everything's going to come true. Right? Everybody should be happy, right? No. Because God says, that wasn't my plan. My plan was for Sarai to have a baby. Well, but we wanted to have a baby, and so when we have a baby, and so he should be blessed, and we should be able to do all these things. But they look at it like, well, what do we do? So God promises Abram that he's going to have kids. He does it in a really strange way. Lot, you can sit down real quick. So Abram and Sarai are sitting there in their tent one day. The people are out doing tending the goats and watering the sheep and all these things, and they're sitting there, and all of a sudden these three figures walk up to the tent. And Abram looks at them, and he's like, "Welcome, my friends! Welcome! Come on in! Come on in!" Because that's what they did as part of their culture. They were very hospitable. It wasn't every day somebody would walk by and come by. So they're like, "Hey, come in, get out of the heat." And he looks to Sarai and he says, "Go and make some bread. Get some drink. Bring it for our guests." And so Abram is sitting there and talking to them, and they look at him and they said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And Abram said, "There in the tent." Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah will have a son." Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age, and it had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. That means she couldn't have children anymore. So Sarah laughed to herself and said, "After I have grown old and my husband is old, shall I have a baby now?" Then the Lord said to Abram, "Why did Sarah laugh?" Right? Why did she laugh? Does she not believe me? But it's going to be true. These three visitors come and share a message saying Sarah's going to have a baby in the next year. And she does. And they have this wonderful son. And the people tell him that this son will be named Isaac. So we have now two children. Isaac by Sarah and Ishmael by Hagar. And Abram's like, "Well, we should, this is my son, but I don't want bad things to happen. But I've got to send away Hagar because Sarah is getting into fights with Hagar and they're not doing well. And, I don't want to have disruption and these things." And so they send them off. And so Hagar takes her son Ishmael. But God promises that he's going to make Ishmael as prolific a nation as he was going to do with Isaac. He's going to do that same blessing to Hagar and her son, that he will be the leader of a great nation will rise from him in that. Do you know what that nation is? Islam. And so, here in the Bible, in the story of Abraham, we have the very beginnings of the dispute between the Jews and the Muslims. Both descendants of Abraham. Both of them look to Abraham as the father of their nations. They both adore him in Scripture and see him as this great figure of faith. But even to this day, we have Muslims and Jews killing each other. Right? We have people not trusting each other of these two faiths. But we come from the exact same origin. This origin point of God loving his people and promising them great, wonderful things. Very, very strange, right? Why can't we just love each other, right? So, We'll get back to Lot here in just a second. You can go over here. Thank you. So Lot, stand on up. Do you remember what cities I said you lived near? Does anybody? There were 2 towns that were on either side of where Lot had set up his farm, his ranch. One of them was called Sodom, and one of them was called Gomorrah. And these were evil towns. Terribly, terribly, terribly evil towns. And I'm not just saying like the people were mean to each other. They did all kinds of horrible things. They didn't believe in like, there were lots of, I don't know how to describe it. They worshiped gods and they did evil things. They would have sex with their family members, sex with other people. They would do things that were corrupt. They did not live the kind of life that would be representative of what God intends for people, right? And so God comes to Abram and says, I'm going to destroy Sodom because they're a bunch of evil people. Now, Lot goes to Sodom every once in a while. He lives near there. He doesn't want him to get destroyed. He goes, well, my nephew's a good guy. So we have this dialogue between God and Abram where he literally says, okay, God, if there are 50 good people who live in Sodom, will you spare the whole town? Now, how many of you would feel comfortable going up to God and wanting to try to convince God to change his mind? I wouldn't feel comfortable. Grace, I'm sure you would. You would have a full-blown discussion with God about whatever you wanted to change. But most of us would be too terrified. But God looks at Abraham and says, sure, if there are 50 good people in the town of Sodom, I will save the whole town. So Abram looks and goes, okay, well, what if there's 40 good people in the town? I mean, because, 50 is a lot. Maybe it's just 40. Okay, God says, that's fine. If there's 40 good people, Abraham looks at him and he's like, okay, God, how about if there's only 20 good people in the town? I mean, 20 that's a good number. That's like a whole family. Maybe there's a good family living there. And God says, okay, Abram, if 20 good people live in the town of Sodom, I will save the town. I will spare them. I will not destroy them off the face of the earth. Abram gets him down and says, okay, but, sometimes brothers and sisters don't get along very well. So what if there's only like 10 people in this town? He keeps having this negotiation with God of how many is enough people to save the town. And he gets down and he says, if there's 10 people, I'll save the town. And God says, I'll do that. Now, really, there weren't any good people in the town of Sodom at all. And so Abram goes and warns Lot and says, we need to get out of here. You don't want to be hanging around these people. These are not good people. God is going to destroy this town. And so he takes Lot and all his stuff and Lot's family and his wife, and they leave the town. And as they are leaving the town, God destroys these 2 towns. Burns them to a crisp. Wipes them off the face of the earth. This is a strange little story. Lot's wife looks back longingly because she kind of like, I'm worried about the town. I don't know if I really want to leave. And God turns her into a pile of salt. I know, it's a very strange story. But this is the book of Genesis. God tried to be merciful. He wanted to be merciful for his people. People read this story and they're like, God hates people. See, he destroys people that he doesn't like. God gave them the benefit of the doubt. If he could find 10 people in their hearts that loved God and were good people, he would spare them. And he couldn't. So he wiped them away. It's a terrible story. We look at it from the perspective, we don't like to see that aspect of God, that God is judging, right? We don't want to be judged. I don't want to be judged by God. Do you want to be judged by God? No. But he has rules. He has expectations. He has covenants that he makes with us. And he wants us to live up to those and be part of those. So he does the most he can do to try to save his people. But sometimes we get in our own way and we don't let ourselves be saved. So Sodom and Gomorrah are totally, totally destroyed. We're just getting to all kinds of stories. This is why I love the story of Abraham. But now we have even a better part, because 9 months later, we have a baby Isaac that comes into the world. And everybody is super happy, right? You love Isaac. You love Isaac. He is the joy of his parents. How old is Abraham at this point? He is 100 years old. You are 100 years old, grandpa, with this little baby bundle of joy. I'm sure Sarah is 90 years at this time, really likes waking up with the baby at 2 a.m. in the morning. How many of your grandparents or great-grandparents would like to wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning with a screaming baby? No? No? I'm seeing all the moms going like, nope, that's a young person's game. But they do. They have this wonderful son named Isaac. And he grows up to be a wonderful young man, and they love him. You guys can all, yes, you can all go sit down. Thank you very much for your help of standing here and being my props. So Abram takes this story, and he has this son named Isaac. And he loves Isaac. He is the light of his life. He's like, this is the promise that God made for me. He's given me land. He's given me so much things. I have more than I could ever want. He saved me. All these things. Oh, I forgot to mention, I skipped one story. You know how in Egypt, he did that thing where he said, hey, Sarah, you're my wife, you're my sister? He does it a second time, and the same thing happens, and he gets more stuff. It's very, very strange. I don't encourage you to try to sell your spouse off as your sister to try to get stuff. That probably will not work well. That is not the story of the Bible. But Abraham does it twice. It's kind of crazy. But we get back to Isaac. We have Isaac, his son, right? His joy. And God comes to Isaac when his son's probably about 9 or 10 years old and says, I want you to take Isaac up on the mountain, and I want you to sacrifice him to me. Now, this is the story, one of those stories that we look at in modern times and we're like, that's child abuse. Child abuse. Somebody should have called the authorities on him, called the police, have him come do that, right? He says, take your son up on the mountain and sacrifice him to me. I will provide. And so Isaac is there, and they're getting ready to go make their sacrifices because they made sacrifices on regular occasions. When Isaac was born, they made a sacrifice to God. When you'd have weddings, you would make sacrifices to God. When you had a new crop, you would make sacrifices to God to say, God, we are thankful for the things you have given us. Wasn't children. Usually it was like goats and sheep and birds and things like that. So they're getting ready to go up on the mountain, and Abraham comes and says, Isaac, we're going to go make an offering to God. So he's like, load up on sticks. So they get a big bundle of sticks, and they strap it to Isaac's back, and they begin heading, and Isaac looks at his dad, and he says, Dad, what are we going to sacrifice? You know, we didn't bring a goat. We didn't bring any sheep. And Abram looks at his son, and he says, God will provide. And they go a little bit further and says, Dad, I don't see anything. God hasn't provided anything. You know, I can see them going up the mountain, and they're progressing up the mountain. And they get up to the place where they have this altar built to sacrifice. And they put the sticks on there, and they get it ready, and Abram takes his son and he places him on the altar. I'm sure his son's like, "Dad, what's going on?" And Abram looks at him and he says, "God will provide." And it literally says, as he was getting ready to kill his son, he hears a noise off in the thicket, the briars right nearby. And he looks over, and there's a ram with its horns caught in the thicket. God provided the sacrifice. So they go and they grab that and they sacrifice that instead of Isaac. God didn't want Abraham to sacrifice his son. He just knew that Abraham's faith in him, his trust in him was so complete that Abraham knew in his heart God would provide what he needed. And so he went along. That's what he does. God provides for his people. We just often don't trust God. Throughout the entirety of the rest of the Bible, Abraham is lifted up over and over and over again as this faithful follower of God, right? God says go, he goes. God says sacrifice your son, he sacrifices your son. He has willing conversations with God where even Abraham's willing to risk everything and negotiate on behalf of a bunch of people who live in a town who hate his God and do everything possible to be against what God represents. But Abraham says, I know God loves his people, and God loves all his people, so I want to see if I can do anything to help them. Whenever in the Bible they lift up people of faith, Abraham's name is usually one of the first people he does. Did he do everything right? No. Trying to trick a king and giving your wife to a king, that's probably not the way God intended it. But God doesn't expect us to be perfect. God does not expect us to do everything right. God does not expect us to be everything. He just wants us to love him and trust him. That's going the wrong way. The story of Abraham sets up everything else that happens. And so next week we're going to talk about, so Abraham has a son. His name is Isaac, right? Isaac grows up, and Isaac has two sons. His sons are named Jacob and Esau. And next week we're going to talk about Jacob, because I think Jacob is one of my favorite characters in the entire Bible. He is like the worst kid in your class who always tries to get away with everything. That's Jacob. He does everything he possibly can to thwart God's love, to do the opposite of what God wants him to do, but God still keeps pulling him in. So we're going to talk about Jacob. One of the Bible verses, I would like you to go to Genesis 15, 13 through 16, and underline those verses. And this is what it says. Know for certain, this is God talking to Abraham. Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation that they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. We're talking about the 10 Commandments this part of the year. And we'll go over each individual one. We're talking about this right now, the history leading up to this. So we talked with Abraham today. We're going to talk about Jacob next week. One of Jacob's sons was this kid named Joseph. And some of you may have heard of Joseph in the multicolored coat, right? We're going to talk about Joseph. And out of Joseph, the Israelites end up back in Egypt. And there they spend 400 years as the slaves of the Egyptians. And after being there for 400 years, God sends Moses to free them. And in freeing them, also gives them the Ten Commandments. But even back here, when God is talking to Abraham, he says, things are going to get bad. But I want you all to know that in advance, and that I'm not going to forget about you. I am going to love you all the time. I am going to be watching over you, and in the end, it will be good. You will come back to this land that you're standing on right now, this land that I promised you, this land that you left your home from, went on this long journey, even to Egypt and back. Your family will be here, and they'll be here forever. This is the story of the Old Testament. Lots of times people will say the Old Testament's all about God hating people. He smites people. Yeah, he did. He wiped out the town of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? The entire book of Joshua, for the most part, is the story of the Israelites coming back into Egypt, into the Promised Land, and literally the first few chapters is like, and they went and they fought this tribe, and they killed them and wiped them off the face of the earth, and they took their land. And they went over here and they fought these people, and they wiped them off the face of the earth, and they took their land. And that's not the stories we want to hear. That's not the stories that we get in the New Testament with Jesus, right? We all want stories of love and that. And so people have this image of the Old Testament that it's like all fiery and wrathful and God hates his people. But I think when you read into it, that it's really God loves his people so much that he does anything for them. He picks these band of people, this family, and says, I want you to be mine, and I want to be yours. We have to love each other. That's the whole point of the Ten Commandments. This group of instructions that God gives his people saying, I want to love you. You want to love me. What do we have to do that? And he gives them the Ten Commandments. He hands it down to them and says, this is what we're going to do. So we're going to talk for a few weeks of the history leading up to this. So you can hear some of these silly, sometimes crazy, outlandish stories, like towns being wiped off the face of the earth, people having babies and taking goats and all kinds of things, so that we better understand that. Does anybody have any questions about what we talked about tonight? I know there's a lot. There's a lot of silly stories. Next week, we're going to have some a little bit of activity for you to participate in. Yes, Brandon. You can keep your crown. You've earned it. Anybody else? No questions? I covered the story of Abraham so well, nobody had a single question. Wow. Have you all heard the song, Father Abraham? Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. You guys haven't heard that? Oh, you? Okay. Yes, Brandon. His first son, Ishmael. Yeah. Ishmael goes off, and Ishmael's descendants become basically the followers of Muhammad in Islam. And so they set up in a different part of the country and become descendants and believers of Allah, who is the God of Abraham. Like I said, these are, for as much as we talk about the differences between our religions, these two gigantic religions, because Islam is one of the biggest religions in the world, right? Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are the three big religions. All three of them tie back to Abraham in some way or form. You can literally go through the Bible, and it tells you the lineage that goes from Abraham all the way to Jesus. There is a direct line that goes all the way from Abraham to Jesus that's outlined in the Bible. You can literally memorize every name of every generation between there. We all come from Abraham's line. We are all part of that promise that God made to Abraham, that I will make you a great nation. Your people will be so much that it will be more than the stars in the sky. You will be my people, and you will be a blessing for all people. Those that bless you, I will bless. Those that curse you, I will curse. And everything you do will be a blessing. That is the good news of Abraham. We are part of that as God's people. And sometimes we forget that. We let the things divide us. But really, we're all together. We should be one big happy family. One body. Now, if we could all just love each other, right? All right. So, looking to see who we have here. So, if you were with Tom last week for small groups, who did you have last week? 6th and 7th grade guys. The dudes. You can go with him. Let's see. So, who did you have last week, Kara? 6th and 7th grade girls. We'll go with Kara. And then Alyssa and Sophia, will take the 8th grade girls. Yes. I will take the 8th grade guys because I like to punish myself. You can go outside, you can stay in here, you can go downstairs. If you do use one of the rooms downstairs, please be sure to sanitize them. Where do you guys want to go?